Welcome back, everybody, to Neutrality Studies. My name is Pascalotta, and I'm joined today by two of my favorite analysts from the Caucasus, Lasha Kasradze from Georgia and Arthur Khachikian from Armenia. Arthur, Lasha, welcome back.
Thank you so much.
I'm glad having you both on the same program for once. Had both of you separately, but today we want to talk about what's happening in general in the Southern Caucasus and, of course, in the border region to Iran. Can I maybe ask both of you first for your assessment of what we should be aware of as we speak today on this 24th of March? Maybe we start with Arthur and then Lasha.
Thank you. I shall tell you what we should be aware of. It's a coming economic catastrophe. I'm not an economist, but from what I am seeing in the news and the headlines, the prices for fuel, gas, oil, and then food prices are going to skyrocket. We're facing a global economic crisis. In some Asian countries, there are already fuel shortages. This is going to spread. And we're looking at this madness, this project of occupying the Strait of Hormuz and occupying the island of Kharg, which is going to further escalate the conflict and lead to American casualties and put American soldiers, make them sitting ducks to Iranian drones and missiles. So even militarily, this makes absolutely no sense. And even if it succeeds, it paves the way for the US to go to Iraq and Afghanistan scenarios, 8 years in the first, 20 years in the second scenario. I no longer know how to reason with people who make these decisions. That's, in brief, that's what I would say in brief.
Lasha, what is your main focus at the moment to try to understand what's happening in and around Iran?
Well, I share the pessimism. Unfortunately, I'm looking at the glass half empty here. Because look, we know that this war, first the 12-day war, and now this plan to destroy and dismember Iran, another sovereign nation, there is something much larger to this. Of course, there is a very strong sort of the fundamental element here is, Israel and the way negotiations have been taking place. I would go back to the early 90s, how Israel wanted to sort of penetrate the region via Azerbaijan. But that element cannot be excluded, but there is a larger picture here, of course. This is about sort of weakening and exporting chaos into the wider region. And the aim here is Russia. Aim here is China, at the expense of minions, the South Caucasian republics. Of course, it's about if Iran falls, Armenia is not going to have a good day. Russia cannot afford to sit this one out like it did when Serbia happened in the 90s. It just couldn't do anything, and then it sort of unleashed its revenge on Georgia in 2008, and then eventually Ukraine. That philosophy of West doing what it pleases sort of did not go down well with Putin, but at the same time, they could not do anything with Kosovo when Bush shaved off Kosovo, historic part of Serbia. Long story short, I don't think Russia can afford to do the same. I think Russia is paying very close attention to what's happening. So is China. And the South Caucasus, it won't be good for the South Caucasus if Iran falls or it gets dismembered or one way or the other. If this war escalates, all three republics will come under pressure. I'm still sticking to my guns and saying that if Aliyev thinks that this is some sort of triumph, there was a short-term triumph. We all know what happened with Nagorno-Karabakh, but then there is no strategic depth and strategic sort of future. If you look at if we can appraise the situation that way, neither for Azerbaijan nor for Armenia. So, what is Pashinyan thinking? Maybe Arthur can give us a better take on that. I know that Georgia is staying under the radar to a large extent, very cleverly. But overall, I think this whole Iranian fiasco poses a potential disaster for the entire region, not to mention economic effects and geoeconomic projects that are taking place.
No, it does. Arthur, are you reading any kind of signs of panic coming from Armenia or the region in general? I mean, this is highly dangerous for the South Caucasus as well, right? In addition to all of the crimes that are happening on a daily basis of the bombardment of Iran.
Well, yes, I'll agree with my colleague, my esteemed colleague. This is if you look at it, if you look at the big picture, this is an attack on Russia and China. After Iran falls, all the north-south communications from Russia to Iran and farther south will be cut off. So the isolation of Russia will, Russia will become more isolated, and China will be cut off from its energy supply in the
Right.
Persian Gulf. So this is an attack on Russia and China. Iran is a key ally to both of these countries. I agree with Lasha that Russia can't afford to do anything, but I mean can't afford to do nothing. But at the same time, Russia can't really afford to get involved because Russia is involved in this very very large scale conflict with basically the entire NATO bloc in Ukraine. So it's very difficult to imagine how Russia could take on another region. The Caucasus as a whole is another powder keg. It's another. You can draw a parallel from Balkans or the Middle East. It's like Balkans number two or the Middle East number two. It can explode. It did explode in the 90s. If you remember, there was a war in Chechnya. There was a conflict between Georgia and Abkhazia and then Ossetia, and there was a conflict between Armenians and Azerbaijanis over Karabakh, which doesn't exist anymore, and the population has been expelled. So it is a powder keg, and it may explode. I think in this region, what we're looking at is probably a hegemony of Turkey and Azerbaijan. They're in close alliance. This will not go very well for Armenians. This person who was brought to power by third countries, this is not really our leader. He's an autocrat. He's a tyrant. He is arresting the leaders of our church, arresting journalists, beating them up, beating up lawyers, things that we would never see in the West. But sadly, he's supported by the West. Not the first or last dictator supported by the West. This guy's strategy is total submission. He's basically surrendered Armenia. He is executing every order he gets from our neighboring countries and from Europe. His only objective is to stay in power, because then if he's not in power, he'll have to answer a lot of questions about the disaster that to which he brought Armenia. So Armenia again became a playing card, just a pawn, or a minion, as Lasha says, in the hands of the great powers. We have a lot of experience with this, and all of it is very, very tragic. It usually ends with Armenians being exterminated. The Kurds learned this lesson twice in the last 10 years or 8 years. And we have learned this lesson right in the last 150 years, which one of the reasons why the genocide of Armenians happened is because they trusted certain powers to protect them, defend them, and try to rely on them. And this is how it ended. So there is a big danger of this conflict spreading to the Caucasus. I hope that it doesn't. There have been several pretty severe warnings to Azerbaijan issued by certain commentators, including Professor Marandi. Somehow I suspect that he probably knows something when he says this. Perhaps there is some kind of official position that he's reflecting in what he's saying. I certainly hope that Azerbaijan does not get involved. So far, it has been very careful, even after the drones fell on its territory. But it is a powder keg. It may explode. So things can get a lot worse if this conflict continues.
Hey, very brief intermission because I was recently banned from YouTube. And although I'm back, this can happen anytime again. So please consider subscribing not only here, but to my mailing list on Substack. That's pascalotta.substack.com. The link's going to be in the description below. And now back to the video. May I just ask, I mean, in the very first week of the war, we've heard that, there were plans or talks about, on the one hand, Kurdish militias may be intervening from Iraqi territory, and on the other hand, Azerbaijani military may be intervening from the north, from the Caucasus, right? And both of these things didn't really happen. So, and I don't know if that was just like media chatter and rumor, or if some people in the background were really working on that. does one of you, and maybe let's start with Lasha, have any information if there's still something going on about this, like escalating the war from the north? Because at the moment we are still like mostly focused on the Gulf region, on the Strait of Hormuz, and the missile war. But is there a danger that this might actually, there might be some form of land invasion still coming, not through by boots on the ground that the US flies in, but by people who cross the border from one or the other side?
I have not heard anything to that extent and to that detail, Pascal, other than to say that whole Kurdish issue has been a problem in the Middle East. Turkey has perhaps brilliantly used this to its own advantage. Erdogan has played a good game, but Erdogan's gamble to what extent will prevail and continue is another question. We remember how he used this to his advantage when Syria collapsed. But the thing is, Turkey is a huge element in this, a huge part of this whole issue. Right now, it's sitting on the fence, playing its regional balance. It has worked out for Erdogan. Let's be honest about that. Um, um, in terms of Iran, I don't subscribe to the whole idea that Iran's dismemberment and Azeri minority, or if you can call it that, there are more Azeris living in Iran than in Azerbaijan. But the whole separation, I think they're very well edged in Iran's nationalism. So any disruption there is a high order. I mean, in terms of rallying Irani Azeris to join what exactly? To join Azerbaijan, to dismember. I mean, they won't like it. They sure ethnically Azeris, but they belong. They have a very strong sense of identity as Iranians, and some of the research that I've done on that, they're just not going, and they're not separating out of from Iran. With Turkey is interesting. Turkey has been playing this sort of I'm a member of NATO card, and using and sort of taking care of the whole Kurdish issue, um, taking advantage of that and sort of resolving to a certain extent the whole Kurdish issue. But Turkey is playing a game. I think Turkey is playing it's gambling. What happens? Because Turkish situation is Turkey has this whole pan-Turkic idea that it has vis-a-vis Israel, vis-a-vis Azerbaijan, of course. I'm afraid that Turkey down the road might be left naked and might be left abandoned, really. Yes, Turkey has said, I think before I'm just sort of veering off here slightly, but before the invasion of Iran, if you remember, there was an article in Bloomberg that said that Turkey was willing to create a buffer zone within Iran if Iran fell. So those are the sort of grand visions that Turkey has, right? That whole pan-Turkic Turan vision, and so with Armenia, let me just go back to Armenia real quick. It has become falsely attractive for Armenia to get on this bandwagon. And I would also argue for Azerbaijan as well, because that strategy won't take either of these countries anywhere, in my view. If Turkey becomes abandoned. And I don't think, and then we also know the Turkish-Israeli relationship. There's a conflict there.
Yeah.
So to what extent Turkey is going to carry these two countries, especially Azerbaijan, is a sort of a question to watch.
But that is what Turkey did with Syria. I mean, we're looking at the Syrian model. Like several sides are thinking about Syria as a model for Iran, because Turkey did occupy a buffer zone in Syria, and from there, in the end, launched the goddamn assault. Pardon my expressions. Like launched the assault in December 2024. That in the end toppled. What was his name? Regime. Bashar al-Assad, right? Arthur, what do you think, and what do you have to add, maybe to this problem in the north of Iran? I mean, Iran is stable, but it seems that other forces try to work against this as much as they can.
First of all, let me say that I think The U.S. got itself into a bad situation. It fell in this trap, and it's trying to find a way out. I think Iran has not been destabilized, has not been dismembered, and now slowly is gaining the upper hand. A lot of thousands of Marines are on their way to the Persian Gulf, and a lot more. Apparently, there's some more news in the media now. There are 3 divisions on their way, from what I'm reading. I have no access to secret sources, nor should I, but there are some media sources. Apparently, thousands more are on their way to the Middle East, and if they seize Kharg Island or any part of Iranian territory, the conflict will expand. They're going to become an easy target for drones, for missiles. There's going to be paramilitary groups, terrorist activity. It's going to be Afghanistan #2 or Iraq #2. We've seen it all. We know how this works. Now, as far as Turkey and Azerbaijan, from what I've seen, there was an attempt to provoke Azerbaijan and Turkey. There was a drone that fell in Nakhchivan, and then there was a missile, I think, twice shot in the direction of Turkey. Iran says this wasn't us. Some sources say that this was Israel trying to get them involved, because obviously the air campaign has been successful, if you call killing thousands of civilians and children a success. And by the way, civilians are also killed in Israel. We have to be fair. We have to look at both sides. So it has been successful, but you can't change a regime without ground troops. And you need, to seize the entire territory of Iran. From our military experts, we hear that you need hundreds of thousands of people. And I hope that they don't commit the suicide. So if they just seize a little bit of a territory, then they're going to become a target, and we're going to see, deaths, casualties, high casualties among Americans. So they try to get the Kurds involved, and from what I have read, the Kurds said no. Tricked me 3 times. Shame on me. They stopped. They said no more. I don't think Turkey would be interested to see Iran disintegrate completely, because then it will have to deal with the Kurdish problem. I don't know what will happen to the Azeris. I'll have to rely on Lasha's expertise, that they feel very loyally pro-Iranian. This may be the case. I may simply not know. I'm not an expert in Iran. Or they may not. People's loyalties change. There's such a thing as propaganda. In my own little republic, for 30 years, we thought of people of Karabakh as our compatriots. And then for dozens of years, Western propaganda taught us that they are not Armenians. They're terrible people. Literally, this is what we were taught by the Western-sponsored media. So if Iran falls apart, then the Kurdish problem surfaces again. And this is a very big problem for Turkey. I'm trying to think, 15 million Kurds living on its territory? So the scenario of Iraq is possible. In Iraq, the Kurds have their own autonomy. They do seem to have some kind of a working relationship with Turkey. So they may try to do the same in this case. And then, of course, the question of what will happen to the Azeri population. It's a very large group, 15 million people. They may or may not claim some kind of autonomy, self-rule, and then some kind of a rapprochement with Azerbaijan may happen, although at this point, we don't see any of it. So this is just speculation. Iran is staying pretty strong and solid. So all that I can say is that I hope the madness stops before another region goes up in flames, because it's not just the Armenian and Azeris. Azeris and Georgians and Ossetians and Abkhazians are going to get at each other's throats again. There are dozens of other ethnic groups in the Caucasus, and some countries will not hesitate to use this as a weapon against Russia. They have done this in the 90s. Many sources are reporting that there was a lot of support from the West, even from Turkey, from some other countries, given to the independence movement in Chechnya. So this is the northern Caucasus may go up in flames. And this is pretty much 1914. And Lasha talked about Serbia in the 90s. There was also Serbia in the early 20th century. Russia doesn't have a very strong commitment to this region. It's basically sharing its influence now with Turkey and Iran, mostly with Turkey. But again, it's a little bit, it's kind of stuck, because it doesn't really have England and France as her allies, like she did during the First World War, and she's facing this entire Western bloc. But this is pretty dangerous, because, like I said the last time when I talked to Pascal, all it takes is for China to get involved in one way. Let's say maybe to start making some noises towards Taiwan, or get involved in some other way, and then we have a classic world war. This is the definition of world war: most great powers involved in many regions of the world. And I don't know when this train will stop.
it just seems to me that the people who should be interested in stopping this at the moment are doing the exact opposite. I mean, we keep talking about this as if though Donald Trump got himself into a quagmire. It seems as if this is exactly what they want. Like take a region and just put a match to it. In any powder keg you find, put a match to it and watch it blow up. I mean, the entire friends in the Gulf region, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, they were basically sacrificed, right? It's like, here you go. We know they're going to attack you. We know they're going to blow you up. We know that your economies are going to be ruined. We know that all of your exports are going to be down. We know that people will die and maybe die of thirst if your desalination goes away. But you know what? We are willing to pay that price. This is, I mean, if even the allies are not safe from the United States, I mean, what to do about others? What can others do at the moment? I mean, Lasha, do you hear anything about also discontent, from the Gulf states and the Southern Caucasus?
With the Southern Caucasus, and every expert I've spoken to, whatever I can get my hands on to read and research, they're worried. But this is not. Remember, it's a very strange situation. The entire South Caucasus, a geopolitical space, is in a very strange location to begin with. On the one hand, some look at it as the extension of the Middle East. Some look at it as part of Europe, but it's never directly affected. It's always sort of ancillary, sort of a fallout effect that will influence that region, right? The main epicenter, of course, is the Middle East here, traditionally understood. Just quickly, I agree with Arthur that Turkey does not want Iran to disintegrate and explode into next, post-Assad regime type scenario. It wants to weaken it, perhaps. It does want it to be weakened so that it can have a much more influence vis-a-vis Russia also. It's bugging me that everyone there was this sort of a conventional wisdom in international relations that three major regions, if I may just mention this point, are of vital importance to the security of the United States, right? So Western Europe, European continent, the Middle East, and Northeast Asia, so China. Balancing or rolling back, or however you want to sort of look at the potential conflict with China, or managing that issue. And yet here we are seeing this is we remember the first Gulf War, what Bush Sr. did immediately after Saddam Hussein sort of stepped into foolishly into Kuwait, and then we saw what happened there. He was immediately stopped. The second time, Washington was not that forgiving, but that showed us that there was a vital national security interest in the region. Oil, oil, oil was the mantra of the day. I'm very surprised to see today's Washington waiting and seeing and actually pressing and being, dissatisfied with the Gulf states, the way they're quote unquote complaining. They've become victims for sure. So far, it seems to me they're victims of the American hubris and this maniacal sort of obsession with Iran. But that whole strategy where if anybody touched the Middle East, the Gulf states, America would act and protect them. And here it is, America sort of subjecting all the Gulf states to major risk. And what do we see? It's sort of a contradictory, paradoxical chain of events, that is unfolding. They're at risk from Iran. Israel's and America's foe. So to what extent that question sort of applies in this particular situation, I don't know. Yes, of course, oil will be protected and if we can imagine sort of a large scale, I know if China acted, and if we can sort of fantasize a little about this and sort of expanded our horizons and imagine if China, decided to manipulate the Middle East to the point where, it was going to kick, the United States out, of course, U.S. would act. But we are seeing now U.S. sort of sacrificing, these Gulf states, it sort of raises a question in my mind. Perhaps I'm completely wrong theoretically here, but maybe you could.
No,
Yeah.
I completely agree. I mean, we're seeing the US sacrificing its allies, which in my view should actually increase the incentive for all of these states around there to basically declare their neutrality in one way or another in order to distance themselves from this. But Arthur, I mean, Armenia, Mr. Pashinyan, what is it now? Oh, almost a year ago, 8, 9 months ago, right? They did this meeting, this kind of show in Washington where Armenia and Azerbaijan shook hands, and Donald Trump was, haha, I solved the war, and then we're gonna do the trip, right? This Trump corridor, the Zangezur corridor on the U.S. 99-year lease tutelage, a very, very kind of 19th century type of agreement. I mean, this is not signed. This is not a ratified treaty or anything, but the idea is still there to give this corridor that borders Iran, Armenia and Iran, to the United States under their control. Is it possible that Armenians, especially now, still look at this idea of Pashinyan and still go like, yes, go for it, that's good?
We have been completely conquered and infiltrated. Armenians think what they're told to think. We are a small republic with 2.5 million people. We have hundreds and hundreds of bloggers who've been trained in the West or paid by the West. We have our only television channel that's completely controlled by the government. We have thousands and thousands of people who receive money from the West to brainwash our people on a daily basis. This is why I told you this is the end of democracy. Democracy has become the art of manipulating people's minds using the social media. This is informational colonization. This is informational annexation of a country. There is just a very vivid image. There's a certain type of a wasp that basically infiltrates. It catches a bug and it puts a poison in the bug's head. Then the bug becomes paralyzed. Then this wasp puts its eggs in the brain of that bug, and then the eggs start eating him alive, and he can't even move.
Yeah.
It's a very unpleasant image, but this is what happens to countries like this because you become informationally conquered. Your brain becomes conquered. Armenians were convinced by these people that giving up their territory and basically becoming a colony, like you said, you were very polite in how you said it, they basically turned us into a colony. And Trump is celebrating this as victory, that for 100 years we have ceded our territory, 74% of it to the US, and then later on it's going to become somebody else's. I think I know who. And now this is being celebrated as a victory precisely because we don't have a brain of our own anymore. Our brain has been conquered by Western-sponsored bloggers and journalists and propagandists. They've trained them by hundreds and hundreds. So now our people are being told it's okay that our compatriots were expelled from Karabakh. I mean, nobody wants a war. I don't want a war. I wanted a peaceful agreement that would keep these people there, have some kind of a power-sharing arrangement, like it's done everywhere in the world. I'm not an enemy to Azerbaijan or to Armenians. I believe that human creatures should learn to manage them. But this is a surrender. And we were convinced that surrendering is a good thing. We were convinced by all these Western-sponsored media. I mean, look, in the case of Georgia, Lasha can say this better than I can. The new government in Georgia was trying to basically have a balanced foreign policy, not get involved. From what I understand, they were even offered to start a war in Russia. Somebody told me, start a war with Russia. And according to one of the dignitaries from Georgia, and then he said, well, we can only hold on for a few days. And then he was told, well, then you can go and fight in the mountains. I have read this somewhere. I mean, Lasha can say if this is true. But in our case, Monsieur Macron, who is a big fan of Charles Aznavour, who is natively Armenian, who signed a death sentence to 120,000 Karabakh Armenians, he was in Prague when they were surrendered. He was sitting right next to our little Saddam Hussein. So he told our government, we would love for you to become a buffer zone against Russia. He openly told them that. And a British MP also said, we would be happy to defend Armenia against Russia, but not any other country, basically. So there's this open informational conquest of the Caucasus. And sadly, many people don't understand they're just being used as a playing card, and they will later be abandoned, like Georgia was abandoned in 2008 after this war was provoked, like Armenians were abandoned throughout the last 150 years endlessly. And this only ended with one thing: they were exterminated. So great power politics is a very cynical game, and it's very dangerous to be conquered, to have this informational colonization of your country, because then your people can't think. A third power controls the public opinion in your country. Do you understand what it is? They decide what your people think because they program them. Like I can program my computer, they program the entire society.
This is exactly what Georgia has been working to shutting down with the
Yeah.
NGO law and so on. Lasha, what we talked about this the first time we talked, I think 2 years ago or so. I entitled that video "The One That Got Away." I mean, for some reason, Georgia managed to learn that lesson in 2008 and then do something about it. How did that work?
It is quite miraculous, actually, based on what Arthur said, how ruthless the international system can be, especially towards small countries, divided, weak states. It is, considering the previous decade or two after the collapse of the Soviet Union, where Georgia was in terms of promises. And Arthur, what you said, I'll just call it basically propaganda, right? Just to simplify, you are spot on in terms of uh, being brainwashed, having these countries, and then radicalize the society as much as you can between the Easterners and Westerners, and then kill each other basically, and then weaken the society to the point where the third party, let's just say the US or Russia, come in and they'll say, um, we will take care of you guys, right? So, the thing is, Georgia, yeah, they miraculously. Now, I attribute that also to a large extent to the fundamental changes in the international system. For your audience and for simplifying this, let's just say the shift from unipolarity to multipolarity, that sort of gives an opportunity on on average, generally speaking, to small states to balance and to survive better, right? No guarantees still, but I think the literature on this topic sort of offers suggests that during multipolar or balance of power climate, small states have a much better chance. So we all know that, and so the history sort of proves this, because during the unipolar moment, Georgia stood no chance. Idealism was giving primacy. It's amazing how paralyzed the Georgian society has become over decades. The words such as realism, pragmatism, realpolitik, national security interests have been distorted. That they were not even heard as much. Um, uh, you know, Up until, I would say, a few years ago, when sort of this language of realist language started to enter the Georgian society and polity. That's tragedy in and of itself. So yeah, Arthur is spot on when he says that these countries have been used up to the advantage of great powers. Not because they want to do some nation building in Georgia or Armenia or in the South Caucasus, and not because they want to develop and modernize the region, but because they have visceral hatred of Russia. They still look at Russia as a major strategic foe. That turned out to be false. But then, in the meantime, who cares if we can weaken Russia, use these minions as battering rams, and if Russia then, again, does some crazy thing like invade Georgia, shave off Abkhazia, South Ossetia, or this time recognize these two regions as separate countries within a country. So be it. We'll tell them that they are brave, freedom-loving folk, fighting against this monstrous Russia. When all of it, I mean, come on, we cannot forget Ukraine here, right? The 500-pound gorilla in the room. That's exactly what happened with Ukraine. We can use all kinds of words, provoked, foolishly. We could have avoided this. All of those are true. But imagine but think about the time that we are talking about these issues, post factum. It always happens. And then we always apologize in the West. We always say, oh, sure, this could have been avoided. Well, there are plenty of clever people in Washington and Brussels that could have said, let's prevent this is madness. Russia will never allow Georgia, let alone Armenia and Ukraine, become members of NATO on its borders. This
Lasha,
is
but they did
ridiculous.
say that. Lasha, I'm so sorry. I have to jump in because you're making
Yeah,
such a great
please.
point. They did say that. They did
They
say
did
that.
say that, right?
Was it
Right. That's just the
Merkel?
hypocrisy
Was
we
it
have to deal
François
with.
Hollande? Was it François Hollande, the one who was going to see his mistress on a bicycle? How French. I think he was the one who said that, wasn't he? It was Hollande and Merkel who said Russia would never accept this. Let's not do this. In 2007, was it?
2008 Bucharest.
2000
Yeah.
Bucharest, of course.
Yeah. Professor Mearsheimer keeps talking about it all the time.
Absolutely.
So does Professor
Absolutely.
Sachs. It's a well-known fact.
And Merkel has admitted it. You know,
Yeah, so
but Arthur, keep talking. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, we knew it, we saw it, it was predicted, Mearsheimer and others, and it was well understood, and still it goddamn happened. And just like with Iran, it is predicted. We know this is going to be either a bloodbath or mass murder or both, and on all sides, and still it's happening. Arthur.
first, let me say that my heart breaks when I see the deaths and I see young Ukrainian boys, young Russian boys killed. I see thousands of graves. I see these poor people being dragged in the street, forced to be conscripted. It's heartbreaking. They're screaming as they put them in cars to send them to the meat grinder. These are people who live peacefully, for better or for worse, with all the problems of being part of an empire. If you call it an empire, there's a whole debate about that. They live peacefully, and they didn't deserve to be killed in such numbers, because the numbers I'm hearing from NYT, New York Times, is saying over 1.5 million. Are you joking? Do you understand what you did? This is World War I. This is World War I numbers. This is unbelievable. And Georgians and Armenians and Azeris. The thing is, I think when people make such decisions, they're not guided by ethical considerations or moral considerations. They're guided by interest groups, the same interest groups that pushed Trump into this horrible war, into this trap, out of which he's trying to find his way. These are interest groups. These are certain organizational procedures for decision making, personal biases. Like I said, when I was in the Soviet Union, I was the most pro-Western person. I was very, very sympathetic, and I have a lot of friends. And I really love the Baltic republics. I love Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. I have a lot of friends in Poland, in Czechoslovakia, what it was at the time. I completely understand that these people had their trauma, have their wounds, have their scars from the past. It is legitimate. It should be addressed. Certain, apologies should be offered. I'm with you on this one. But hate cannot be perpetuated. You cannot perpetuate hate. And when you attack Russia right away for everything that went wrong during the communist period, which it did, and which Russians were also victims of the communist regime, and you're forgetting it, there is a way to end hatred and move forward. And we didn't have the wisdom of doing it. We live in a time of emotions. People express emotions. And now we're run by people who are like toddlers. They're driven by emotions. They're like fanatics. I mean, I quoted, Pete Heck said the other day, a very macho men's man with a large following probably among women, a small percentage of men, but he speaks like a toddler. These people speak like children. I don't know how to convince them. I don't know what to tell them. You're causing a global famine. A representative of the United Nations said that we're looking at millions of refugees potentially, and a global hunger and a crisis that's comparable to 1929. And they still can't stop. So I don't know how to argue with these people.
Lasha, do you want to take over from here? Because I mean, it is very, very bleak. This entire war, also, I mean, first the one with Ukraine, but now the one with Iran, are just as large red stop signs as they get. The only even larger red stop sign is the one with China, and that's the one that they're gearing up towards trying to get as heavy as they can. If we follow the argumentation by Brian Barletic, then all of this, including Ukraine and Iran, are done in order to have a war with China before it's irreversibly bigger and more powerful with the United States. Can you make anything out of that?
Yes, I think quickly on geopolitics, I think the three countries will basically stabilize the situation, realizing fully that they cannot kill each other because they're all nuclear powers. So the triad of, say, United States, Russia, and China will eventually come together, and they will dominate international system. Right now, what we are seeing is the combination of sort of using the peripheries, world peripheries, if you will, to see how far each state can take this. Again, of course, there are some variables there that we cannot do without, meaning Israel's hatred and concern, to put it mildly, of Iran, as it views Iran as an existential threat, right? That plays a huge role. Of course, we cannot discount that. But overall, I think from a grand strategic point of view, I think the three countries will come together at the end of the day, and they will sort of stabilize to a large extent their national security interests. They will declare their vital national security interests, their economic interests. For example, China going through the Central Asia, the Caucasus, all the way to Europe, in an effort to create, sort of strengthen Belt and Road Initiative and make more money. And so the geoeconomic projects will come into synergy with geopolitical interests. And then I think these three countries sort of, in the end, will stabilize the situation. Yes, we've heard about World War III scenario. Mathematically, scientific, sort of logical positivism here doesn't work in my view. We can look at history all we want. I don't think the current environment is World War III environment where we have nuclear power. There will be an Armageddon. We will just end the world then, if that's what they're thinking. So I think, yes, there are mad folks, ideologically driven folks, Brussels, even Moscow, of course, and then Washington. Those ideologies, to a certain extent, are fighting for, and then implementing their respective foreign policy views. But I do think that geopolitics and national security interests will prevail. I don't think this is going to be a civilization, even though I think Huntington's thesis has come closest, right, in terms of resemblance on what's happening here, because there is some sort of a biblical sense with which Israel is approaching the Middle East and the whole Palestinian issue, Greater Israel, and then Iran, of course. But I think that hard power politics will prevail. That's an irony there, because hard power politics is, I need what I need to get at all costs. But then they will be balanced by the other two.
Right.
So, yeah. But I also want to finish it very quickly with a popular sort of example. I watched your previous recording, Arthur and Pascal. It was great. And I think we're all closeted liberals, let me tell you, because when Arthur was saying, remembering the early 90s, when Arthur was, look, my grandmother, I remember like yesterday, listening to the Voice of America. That's how, and then we all know now what USAID and Voice of America turned out to be, correct? So, but the thing is, we all innately believed in the Western project, in the peace dividend. The peace dividend did not give us many dividends, unfortunately. As I said, that's the tragedy of the West. They messed up on their own. They could have managed Russia. They could have managed China. Although with China, it's a regional hegemon. Russia was never going to be a regional hegemon.
They chose not to do it.
They chose not to do it. There was an option to do it, but
Lasha, you and I, we talked to Ambassador Jack Matlock, somebody who said like, don't do this, Arthur. I mean, the disappointment also that speaks from your voice with this entire liberal, dream that collapsed in front of our eyes and not even collapse, was shattered by these people. What do you make out of that? I mean, did we just believe too much?
Arthur.
Sorry, can I ask Arthur?
Arthur, let's go ahead. Yep.
Okay. I think every time a human society goes through a certain transition, it invents a certain system that is conceived as fair, as non-corrupt, as ethical, just. And then inevitably a certain group of people finds a way of abusing that system. I mean, Pascal used the example of Napoleon. You can use Oliver Cromwell, the leader of the English, we call it revolution. They call it the Civil War in England. I mean, he became the new king, basically, of England without actually officially becoming a king, but even used the same stamp. It looked pretty much like the king's official seal, official state seal. Human creatures invent systems that produce justice and morality, and then they invent ways of corrupting them. The democracy of the 80s and 90s, I just remember it as a teenager, and it seemed to me like the promised land. But now it certainly has been corrupted. So something needs to be done to balance the influence of private interest groups, because, like you said, Pascal, they hijack democracy. They should be balanced. Very quickly, because I can see we only have a few minutes. I think, first of all, that Trump is probably not going to stay in power. There's a high chance that Republicans will lose the elections in the fall. After all of this, I think there's a high probability that it will be a Democratic Congress, and I think in that case, the chances of an impeachment proceeding being initiated are pretty high. I think there are high chances that he will be impeached. But then we will have our wonderful Democrats in power, and then if they continue in the footsteps of the previous Democratic administration, the Democratic crusade will continue, this ideological crusade of spreading democracy by force. And like we said during our first interview, Pascal, that's not the way to do it. If you want to convert people, convert Lasha and Arthur the way you did in the past, by your influence, by your example. And my final point, I think what we're seeing now is we are drifting towards a peripheral World War III. It is a World War III, but it is peripheral because the big powers can't fight directly. So they fight each other in these regions indirectly. It's a proxy World War III, what we're going towards. All we need is China to join. When China joins, this is a classic definition of World War III. And my final sentence is, what I see happening, the one way this can stop is if Russia and China drift closer together and have an understanding with the US that they're going to have equilibrium and they're going to balance it. Because after all, the stability of the Cold War was the stability of equilibrium and deterrence. Can they do it? We shall see.
Yeah, but that doesn't depend on Russia and China. It doesn't. It depends on the United States being willing to accept equilibrium. Because if they say, oh, yes, let's do that, and then just use that in order to stab them in the back whenever they can, I mean, you don't. We see the United States time and time again using diplomacy, using this beautiful, rosy language as a way to then just strike another day. And Iran is the prime example of that, I guess. But Lasha, the last words, 1 minute goes to you.
I love my liberal democratic system in the U.S. domestically, but on foreign policy, it doesn't work. I strongly disagree with it. Lies, propaganda, and I think it should be all about realism and restraint. But let's just go back to, say, classic liberalism. Let's not add neo prefix to it. Let's just look at classic and respect classic liberalism of the Western world, Western civilization, Western Europe, where America, why America became America, what its views were towards colonialism, and let's just hope that those ideals will come back. But on the foreign policy international relations system, I think going around and educating folks how to live their lives in their individual respective, how to conduct their cultures, and conform them, let alone to the crazes in Brussels and to a large extent in Washington as well. I think that's a disastrous policy, and sovereignty has to be respected. But us living in America, me living in the States, I do see an enormous value. This is what was the Churchillian saying? We cannot come up with anything better than democracy. So I think we do have to defend it and cherish it. But unfortunately, in the past 3 or 4 decades, it's been raped, really, and something has gone horribly wrong. We can pinpoint, perhaps not exactly, but we do have a pretty good idea of what it was. And so I think we have to be ever more so careful. And I just want to very briefly send condolences to the whole of Georgia for the passing of the Ilya II, the patriarch of the Georgian Orthodox Church. So thanks for allowing me to do that, Pascal.
Thanks.
Yeah. My condolences on so many ends. Also to the Iranians and everybody who's suffering now.
to everyone who is suffering. That is correct.
Sad note to end this, but thank you very much both for your analysis and the thoughts that you're sharing. Arthur Khachikian, Lasha Kasradze, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks.